I know there may be some listeners and viewers who think, hang on a minute, you're one of those terrible right-wing Labour people we hate, and Zach Palantir says you're a terrible right-winger. I would rather scoop my own eyes out with a teaspoon than privatise the NHS. I don't want to see the Labour Party careering all over the shop like a wonky shopping trolley out of control.
I'm Pippa Crerar.
And I'm Kiran Stacey.
And you're listening to Politics Weekly
For The Guardian.
I just say thunder outside. Very ominous. So we're joined by the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, today. Now, Wes, you've just given a major speech on some of the reforms you're making to the NHS and what you plan to do. You've been in post for about 20 months now. If you had to give yourself a score out of 10, what would you give yourself?
I'm not going to do that because I've seen that movie before. And in any case, I don't need to rate my own performance. The public have. And I am one of 16% of people who are currently optimistic about the NHS and its future. This was in the British Social Attitude Survey today. That is actually depressingly low. And beyond the substance of the speech I was giving today, which was an account of what we've done so far and what we plan to do in the years ahead, what I wanted to do over and above all of it is to give people a sense of optimism, confidence and hope that the NHS can and will be better in the years ahead, and not the triumph of hope over experience, but now the triumph of hope through experience of the first 20 months. NHS waiting lists are now the lowest they've been in 3 years. Ambulance response times are the fastest they've been in half a decade. And even this winter, we saw the best 4-hour A&E waiting times in 4 years. But, and this is such an important but, for all of the improvements we're making, seeing is believing. And there are still far too many people waiting far too long for care. And so two things are true. The NHS is better than it was when we inherited it 20 months ago, and it is improving. It is also still not good enough, and there is so much more to do.
Well, look, you mentioned some of the targets that the NHS has, and I just wanted to get a quick yes or no from you on some of these as to whether you will have met these by the end of a first-term Labour government. First one, which you've talked a lot about, is getting 92% of patients receiving hospital care within 18 weeks. Will you have met that by the end of this term?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, getting people seen in A&E within 4 hours.
I hope so.
Cancer care treatment within 31 or 62 days, depending on the severity?
Yes.
Ambulances arriving within 8 and 18 minutes of a 999 call?
If you had have asked me 6 months ago, I would have said, I hope so. I increasingly think, yes, we will hit that by the end of the Parliament. I've got some trust that are pretty much already starting to hit it consistently. So I feel a bit more optimistic and confident about that than I did 6 months ago.
Okay, well, that all is quite optimistic. There's one thing that I wanted to pick up from the British Social Attitude Survey, which you mentioned, which is really fascinating to me to read, because you've talked and you've prioritised bringing down NHS waiting times, as you say. But when you look at what the public's priorities are, as they answered that survey for the NHS, they actually would prefer to have easier access to their GPs and faster A&E care. So they don't prioritise waiting lists. Have you got this all the wrong way around? Should you be prioritising other things?
I don't think so, mainly because you can't solve one of those problems without attacking all of them, because the NHS is a system. And so if people can't get a doctor's appointment, they end up in A&E. Worse for them, more expensive for the taxpayer. If we are not getting them that good primary care, their conditions worsen and often require them to be on a waiting list. Increasingly, we're keeping people off waiting lists because the GPs are able to access specialist support themselves from dietitians and other specialist experts so that their patients can be managed in the community. So all of these things hang together. The reason we went for the waiting times target is because that is the one that is most often up in lights, and it's always been used as the consistent yardstick for NHS performance and improvement. But what I want to see, and what we are showing actually, not just telling, but showing after 20 months in government, is that patient satisfaction with access to GP has gone from around 60% when we came in to just over 75% today. And on those metrics of A&E, ambulance response times, things are improving. And this is the constant balancing act I think I've got as a politician and communicator on behalf of the government, is trying to give people that sense of optimism and confidence of knowing things are improving through evidence and action, not just through words, without people thinking that we're trying to pull the wool over their eyes or that we're complacent.
Now, you talk about pushing ahead with the modernisation of the NHS, and that includes bringing the NHS into the digital age. Palantir, the company which is co-founded by Peter Thiel and Alex Karp, recently won a £330 million NHS contract to help with this. But can you understand why so many people are very worried about the ethics of that deal?
Yes, for a few reasons. Firstly, when you look at some of the things that Palantir's leaders have said in the States, when you look at their political views and their outlook.
Thiel obviously is a huge supporter of Donald Trump.
Oh yeah, and like way to the right. Like if you were to put him and some of those Palantir bosses on the political spectrum in the UK, they would be well off to the right of even Kemi Badenoch's Conservative Party, which is saying something at the moment. And so there's a question people have about values, and then they take that to the next step, which is, so what does this mean for the health service, for data, for our individual data as patients? And so when I was in opposition and I was the Shadow Health and Social Care Secretary, I asked lots of questions about the contract our predecessors signed at the time. And I was assured by our predecessors that, firstly, the data stays here in the UK. Secondly, it is owned by us and we control access to it at all times. The platform they've given us to use to improve our systems, performance, intelligence about how we provide services and tackle health inequalities. All of that is run by us, by the NHS. Palantir don't see our patient data. Those were important assurances. Now I'm in government, I'm in an even better position to continue to assure myself and the public that that remains the case. And, one of the challenges we have in this space as well is that when I think about the future of the NHS and what we can do, there is no doubt that we have in this country something that other countries are racing to try and build, which is a really large and valuable data set that will help us to make new breakthroughs in drugs and scientific research and medical technology, that will help us to expose and then tackle health inequalities, to run the NHS more efficiently. We've got to make sure at every step along the way that that is being done securely and ethically. And there are too few companies that have the capability to support the NHS in order to do that, which is one of the dilemmas we have in this space.
I wanted to put to you some of the criticisms that have been made of you as Health Secretary and the way that you've been running the health service. In particular, there has been a criticism that you've come in having promised no big structural changes, made a whole load of big structural changes that have gummed up the system and have stopped people just simply getting on with their jobs. The most obvious one of which is scrapping NHS England, something you said in opposition you wouldn't do, and then suddenly this government announced it last year. That process hasn't got very far. We still haven't got legislation for that. There still haven't been many redundancies. And that seems to be taking up a lot of time and capacity for the entire health system. There was a report last year, in fact, by the Institute for Government, which said that you had taken a chaotic and incoherent approach to reforming the NHS and warned that there would be a further decay of general practice and social care, which would be a disastrous legacy for you and the government. Can you just respond to some of that? Did you come in and do a load of things that you didn't promise to do and therefore take attention away from what the NHS should really be doing?
So I disagree with almost everything you've just said, Kiran.
Okay, good.
Firstly, where I do agree, it is absolutely true to say that when I came into government, I did not want to come in and do major changes to structures and had no intention of abolishing NHS England in the way that we are doing. My view changed through experience of leading the health service. Where I would take on and reject a lot of the criticism that's been levelled about what we're doing, why we're doing it. I think the NHS has far too many layers of bureaucracy, and I couldn't justify, at a time when public finances are tight and so are family finances, a situation where we had two head offices doing almost the same thing and often competing with, contradicting each other, and that was gumming up the system. I don't say that lightly, by the way. I'm conscious that there are people affected by those changes, and I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think it was the right thing to do to free up resources and put more money into the front line. So that's what we're doing. And I think the one thing that I would pull our conversation together around so far, whether it's on the performance of the NHS and how people feel about it, whether it's the financial sustainability of the NHS, whether it's how the NHS modernises through technology, we cannot afford to be complacent about the NHS and its future. Our opponents in reform want to dismantle it. They don't believe in it. They don't believe in the NHS free at the point of use. They don't believe in it as a public service owned by us to be there for all of us. And if there's one figure that sent a shiver down my spine looking at the social attitude survey, it was the attitude of younger people to the NHS. Older people in this country have seen the NHS at its best. In fact, from 1997 to 2010, they saw the NHS going on the same journey we're taking it on now, of going from a failing NHS to its best ever performance. So they know it can be done because they have seen it done. For younger people in this country, they haven't really ever experienced the NHS at its best. A lot of the new generation of staff coming into the NHS have never worked in a good, high-performing NHS. And there is a real risk that those siren voices in reform saying, oh, the NHS, that was nice while it lasted, but can't afford it now, it's not the right model. The danger is that the next generation start to hear that and believe it. And we have got so few people still alive in this country who remember what Britain was like without the NHS. But let me tell you, when I went through kidney cancer, when my family have had hard times over the years, the best thing about the NHS is that whenever you fall ill, you never have to worry about the bill. And I know there may be some listeners and viewers who think, hang on a minute, you're one of those terrible right-wing Labour people we hate, and Zach Palantir says you're a terrible right-winger. I would rather scoop my own eyes out with a teaspoon than privatise the NHS. I've always believed in the NHS as a publicly funded public service, free at the point of use, owned by us, therefore all of us. Labour built it. This Labour government is rebuilding it.
Thank you very much for clarifying that for us. I was hoping to ask you about a couple of other areas. You published your text with Peter Mandelson earlier this year, in The Guardian, in fact. And in them, you said that the government had no economic growth strategy. Do you think that's true? Do you have confidence in Rachel Reeves' plans to grow the economy?
I'm very happy to eat humble pie on this one. In fact, I can point you back some weeks ago to the spring statement the Chancellor gave.
Just say thunder outside. Very ominous.
Yeah, that's
Rachel Reeves'
that's what
wrath
happens
reaching us from the Treasury.
That's what happens when members of the cabinet start to talk about fiscal rules. You hear the thunder gathering. But no, there's a serious point here. Thinking back to that spring statement Rachel was giving, what those numbers showed: falling interest rates, inflation coming back under control, wages rising faster than living costs for the first time in a long time, and actually a really positive outlook for the economy based on the choices she is making, the government is making. The tragedy of the spring statement was that she knew, we knew, the country knew, as she was giving it, that what is going on in Iran has every chance of knocking those numbers off course. She will respond to that. She will lead the country through it. We're better equipped to weather that storm that we can see gathering outside my office window because of the choices that she has made.
And we'll ask you about that in a minute if we may. But on the Mandelson messages, your colleagues weren't very happy about you publishing them, were they? About us publishing them?
No, and look, I take that on the chin, and I don't take that lightly. Actually, my intention is never to put my friends and colleagues in a difficult position. My reason for doing it, and for doing it when I did it, was I'd basically had an entire weekend of smear and innuendo, of people implying a proximity to Peter Mandelson and a closeness that I thought was unfair and untrue. I'm not saying I didn't know the guy. I'm not saying I didn't seek his advice. And, like with lots of people who were in the last Labour government. But I just thought, hang on a minute, I'm not having this. And I'm not having, some people on our own side notionally saying that I had something to hide. So I thought, fine, sunlight's the best disinfectant. You want to see my messages? Here they are. Go for it.
So you know more than many that, of course, policy is the most important thing, but that optics and politics really matter. Do you think that the whole Mandelson saga has been damaging for you, let alone for the Labour Party and the Prime Minister?
No, not really, because, I'm as disgusted as everyone else by his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and what that reflects and what that says to Epstein's victims. And I also felt, and you could feel it actually from what Gordon Brown has said and written, that sense of betrayal. And I think Keir feels that sense of betrayal too. So I sort of feel that quite viscerally, as lots of Labour people do. It's hard to sort of describe to people outside the Labour tribe in a way. If this was someone in the Tories party or in Reform or one of our other opponents, I think we'd all be disgusted by it. But because it's someone who was meant to be Labour and meant to be on our own side, the anger is even more palpable and the disgust is even greater. So that's how I feel about it. But no, I mean, I don't.
But you did know that. I mean, you were texting him. So these messages weren't that long ago, and we knew at that time when you were exchanging quite, frequent texts and sometimes quite private stuff, that he'd carried on his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein even after Epstein had been arrested.
I don't think any of us really knew or registered the extent of that relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, to be honest, Kiran. And I think one of the things that, to your point about, volume of messages, I actually think one of the things that has taken some people by surprise was actually there weren't vast numbers of messages and interactions.
Okay. Can I just ask you something on Iran? You mentioned there the economic fallout from that. One of the things that's been interesting to watch, I think, over the last few weeks is quite how the relationship has changed between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, including now Donald Trump reposting that embarrassing Saturday Night Live UK sketch of the Prime Minister being frightened to call him. I wonder whether you think that it was a mistake to try and get quite so friendly with him in the first place.
Firstly, we do need to get over ourselves sometimes. That Saturday Night Live sketch was not embarrassing. It's just it's comedy. Did
you laugh when you saw it?
I laugh at myself all the time. I just think, honestly, if there's one frustration I've got after 11 years in Parliament, everyone has become so much more po-faced and unable to laugh at ourselves and at each other. And this country would be a lot lighter if we could maybe just rediscover the lost art of the British people to be able to laugh at ourselves and each other. So look, I did see the clip. I'm sure British SNL will get better. It's not quite as good as the American version just yet. And then look, on Keir's judgment and relationship with Trump, I do not think he has had nearly enough credit for the choices he's made and the judgment he's shown. When Keir came in as Prime Minister, all of our opponents and critics in the media were both hoping and expecting that Keir would fall flat on his face, that he wouldn't get on with Donald Trump, there'd be some dramatic White House moment, and our Prime Minister would be humiliated. That's what so-called patriots on the right of British politics wanted to happen. And you could smell their disappointment when it didn't. And what Keir did was build a respectful relationship with Donald Trump in our national interest, in the interests of our European allies, particularly our friends in Ukraine. And Keir has leveraged that as much as he has possibly been able to for the UK in terms of trade and investment and defence, and for our allies. And then we get to the war in Iran. And I do not believe that there are many British Prime Ministers alive today who would have made the judgment call that Keir Starmer made not to join the war in Iran. That was a brave choice. It was bold, and it was correct. Compare it to Badenoch and Farage. One week they were saying how disastrous this was. We should have joined America in Iran. The next week, they changed their mind and said, well, actually, we wouldn't join the war in Iran. Well, they're entitled to change their opinion, but you can't do the hokey cokey in the middle of a war. You can't say one week we're joining the war in Iran and the next week say, oh, actually, it's all a bit difficult and there isn't a plan, we're going to pull out now. I just think they're not serious people and disgracefully played politics in the middle of an international crisis.
Do you think, given we're in the middle of an international crisis, Keir Starmer is actually in a safer position now? There's been so much speculation about his leadership, not least about potential rivals. You yourself as somebody that's been named as somebody that'd be interested in the top job should he end up going. Does the war and his handling of it put him in a safer position amongst his own MPs?
I think I'd say two things about this. Firstly, there is no doubt whatsoever that people have seen in Keir's leadership through the Iran crisis his finest qualities: judgment, level-headedness, and ability to see the bigger picture and make big calls, and the calls in our national interest, as well as the interests of our allies and our collective security and world stability. The second thing I'd say is I know, we all know, that there are lots of people in this country who voted for change, who are still demanding change, and are finding us wanting because of some of the mistakes we've made and because they're not yet feeling change in their own lives and they're not yet feeling optimistic about our country. We all know this. Keir knows this. But look at the scale of the challenges we inherited when we came in. There was never going to be an overnight transformation. We are beginning to see this country moving in the right direction. He's only been Prime Minister for 20 months. Give the guy and the government a chance.
So we all know that May is a moment potentially of peril for Keir Starmer because there's local elections, which Labour may do very badly in, local and regional elections, and also in Scotland and Wales. Are you worried that if there is a leadership contest after that point, the party looks like it's in chaos? I mean, the public wouldn't like that. And if there were a contest, would you run?
I think, to your point about the public, I think there is a risk for the Labour Party if people look at us and think, hang on a minute, we voted for change. We thought you were going to draw a line under chaos. And now it looks like you're going to chop and change.
So you're ruling that out?
And well, I don't want to see Keir challenged in May. I don't think that will happen. And more than that, I'd say in terms of the elections in May, firstly, in our English council elections, they're important in their own right. And I actually feel this quite
London MP.
Passionate. No. Well, also I feel it passionately. I'm a former deputy leader of a council, and it used to. And he swore then. It boiled my blood, rather than the word I was going to use. Boils my blood when local elections are only seen through the prism of what's going on in Westminster. The other thing I'd say is that applies even more so in Scotland and Wales. In Scotland, we have a real chance for change with Anas Sarwar and Scottish Labour. He is the best leader the Scottish Labour Party has had since Donald Dewar and devolution, the creation of the modern Scottish Parliament. And I am able to say, after 20 months as England's Health Secretary, something the SNP in Scotland can't say after 20 years, which is the NHS is better today than I inherited it. They have had and squandered 20 years, and their obsession with grievance politics and the Constitution is leaving educational standards worsening, the gap between richest and poorest kids widening, and the NHS blundering from crisis to crisis on their watch. Scotland needs change, and I just really hope that people in Scotland seize that chance with Anas Sarwar and the team he's got.
But Pippa's question was, if there was a contest that had been triggered by somebody else, would you run?
I don't even think that's going to be a scenario. And I honestly, I'd had the other month like just about my fill of like tedious, like who's up, who's down, like that kind of like politics as a parlour game crap. And I've got a job to do. I've got a big job to do. This is the only job I want to do. I will say that to you even if there is a reshuffle down the line and I'm sat here through gritted teeth saying, I'm absolutely delighted to be doing this other thing I've been asked to do. Like, I love being the Health and Social Care Secretary. I find it rewarding. I find it challenging. I can't think of anything more rewarding to do than to take this country's most precious institution, get it back on its feet and make it fit for the future, knowing that we'll be saving lives and saving the NHS in the process.
Can we put it a slightly different way then? You said in your speech this morning that that challenging things is a reflection of the ambition that all of us have in government. Angela Rayner gave a speech last week in which she talked about the Labour government running out of time, and similar to the sort of language you've used about change, that people aren't seeing it and seeing it fast enough. That was interpreted as a leadership pitch, and whether it was or whether it wasn't, we'll have to wait and see. But she did have some quite strong views on the direction the country was going in under this Prime Minister, and that it needs to go in to sort of deliver that sort of change. When you're talking about challenging things, what direction do you think the government needs to go in if it is to show people that it is properly changing? Out with your own patch of the NHS.
So firstly, if we don't give an account of what this government is doing, no one else is going to do it for us. And I find it astonishing sometimes. If I think back to what this Labour government has done in 20 months, some of the things we've done are extraordinary. So we've delivered the biggest expansion in employment rights in history. No one knows about it. We don't talk about it. We're lifting 500,000 kids out of poverty. What we've done on childcare is saving families hundreds of pounds a month. And as you know, one of my voters said on the doorstep at the weekend, it means, you know, a woman who was otherwise going to work only to pay the cost of childcare and thinking about giving up on her career, because let's be honest, it is often the woman who ends up giving up on her career. She is now at work, and the money she's earning, she's keeping and spending it on her family, doing the things they want. Rather
so
than giving
shout
it to
louder,
childcare.
communicate better. What else?
Look, we've got to recognise that we've got a challenge to our left and our right. So you've got Palantir and the Greens on the left playing what's been actually quite a conventional, traditionally Liberal Democrat role of challenging Labour from the left. The Greens have taken that space. We've got Reform to our right in quite an extraordinary and dangerous way. Like, we're not going to win by trying to out-green the Greens or out-reform. We are the Labour Party. We start every single day with a microphone in our hands and the power to make a difference. Maybe, just maybe, we might win and drive change by being Labour, not trying to be someone else. And I don't want to see the Labour Party careering all over the shop like a wonky shopping trolley out of control because people are allowing our opponents to set our direction and control our narrative. It's happening too often. When I was a Shadow Health Secretary, I had to start every day trying to grab the microphone off the Tories. In government, too often, we've given the microphone away. So enough of that. I'm not dancing to Farage's tune. I want to take him on and beat him. And as for Zach Polanski, if he, this is a guy who thinks that we can enlarge women's breasts through hypnotherapy. So forgive me if I think he's a bit of an oddball who shouldn't be taken too seriously, even if I recognise, as we saw with the Lib Dems when Labour was last in government, that we have a challenge to our left and we cannot take progressive voters for granted. Labour is the Progressive Alliance. Labour is the only party, I think, that is capable of winning a majority at the next general election and delivering progressive change. If anyone listening to this on the progressive left, of which many Guardian readers are, and I count myself among the progressive left, if they think that Polanski's agenda can win Labour seats in industrial heartlands like Cumbria or the northeast of England with their policies on nuclear, with their policies on defence and national security, you are having a laugh. There is a real risk that if progressive voters think that, we can just vote Green and it'll all be better, actually, what you end up doing is gifting this country to the right. We've seen this movie before. We've seen the divisions. And we're not just up against our old foes in the Tory party anymore, dangerous though they would be. We are up against something else with Farage. I do not want to be I don't want to be someone living in a country, let alone part of a government that gives the keys to Downing Street to Nigel Farage and Reform. Labour has got to win on our terms, being a Labour Party, doing Labour things and inspiring people to support us because of who we are and what we do, not just because we happen not to be someone else.
Wes Streeting, Health Secretary. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.